You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
And welcome to the Win-Win podcast. This is Ben Wolf, as always, your host. Very excited to be welcoming my guest today on the topic of being a better negotiator. He is a returning guest on this podcast. He's an expert EOS implementer, a certified Black Swan trainer. You can find out more about him and all of his work at o4g.com. That's letter O, number 4, letter G.com. With that, I give you, and welcome back, Jonathan Smith. Hey, Jonathan.
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be a boomerang back on the show.
That's right. It's at least the third time, I believe. And it's always a pleasure to have you on, because I don't know if people remember things this long, but Jonathan was my EOS implementer in the leadership team that I was on for 3 years, from 2016 to 2019. So consider him a mentor, and just an honor to be able to learn from Jonathan and be talking again here today, and especially on this topic of negotiation. So I just want to jump right in, if I can, and ask you to first give just like 2 minutes of background information, just like sort of where you came from, how you got to be here today, talking about a very different topic than what we talked about last time, which is the negotiation topic, but just sort of a little quick background so we have context for what we're going to be talking about.
Well, I feel pretty lucky I got to be an entrepreneur. So I identify myself as an entrepreneur, and I worked on Wall Street and worked in a big 6 accounting firm at the time, got a bunch of training, but really wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I changed and became an entrepreneur like in the year 2000, was on a leadership team, owner of a business. Ultimately, we used the EOS in that business in like 2005. I was Gino's second or third client.
Wow.
In fact, in 2013, I became an implementer. I've done about 150 implementations. And in 2014, I think I met Chris Voss. Before the book Never Split the Difference, before anyone knew who he was, I didn't even know. I was helping him with a negotiation on a situation he had in Abu Dhabi, and I happened to have relationships in the UAE and was able to help him. I didn't know I was going to help the world's best negotiator negotiate something in Abu Dhabi, but I met him through they have a club called the Tower Club in DC, which is kind of like a university club, or like the Harvard Club or the Yale Club, and everyone sort of congregates there. If you wanted to have breakfast with someone, you just say, I'm going to the Tower Club. So I built my EOS practice. Chris became an EOS client of mine. I claim to be the architect of Chris's Black Swan Group from a business standpoint, not the content. And in that course of time, I've actually had the honor of getting trained in Black Swan skills, the tactical empathy skills, and today can coach those skills.
Well, it's very cool. I mean, I guess one thing that comes to mind for me when I think of, when I think of learning negotiation, when I think of small and mid-sized business owners, is that, okay, maybe it's like a luxury, a nice to have, sort of like a nice icing on the cake. Like, is that mistaken? Like, what have you seen that's given you a different impression about the importance, I guess, or criticalness on a practical life of a business owner and their life or their business in terms of negotiation skills?
I think every conversation is a negotiation. So we all have conversations. Wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't we all be better off to be able to communicate better? And Chris often looks at me and laughs and says, you've had a total mindset shift now that you're using tactical empathy in more parts of your life. So I just engage in the world in a different way. And it's quite an amazing experience. I don't think it's a luxury. I think it's, a skill, an opportunity to get better, and an opportunity to engage in the world with, just be more engaged with the world, I guess.
What have you seen, like, maybe an example or a story, like what have you seen in the way that you engage with the world? I don't know whether your personal life, business life, anything, like what are some ways that you've seen that makes a difference, or like what it looks like without, or what it looks like with those tactical empathy skills?
So I had a certified EOS implementer who happened to be down in New York and wanted to meet with me. So he had gone to, we have Black Swan coaching once a year with certified EOS implementers at our quarterly collaborative exchange. Chris did the first one. We're going to do another one in February. So a lot of the implementers have engaged in this content. I've generally been the leader of that. And so he was with me. We were at lunch, and the woman who was the general manager came over, and we've all had this conversation. She's like, "Hi, how are you? How's your food?" And her expectation is good. Yeah, thank you. Please leave me alone. I want to continue my conversation. So instead of doing that, I said, "Oh, it's wonderful. And by the way, what's your name?" So I asked her name. And then the conversation went to, "Oh, how did you get that name?" So her name was Therese. I couldn't hear it at first. So I said, "Oh, can you spell it?" Because it was loud and it wasn't a name I was expecting. To which, when I asked her how she got the name, she went from like one side of the table to the other side of the table, around, stood next to me, put her arm on my shoulder, and proceeded to tell me all the great things were happening at the restaurant, and that I should come back. And when I come back, ask for her by name. She'll give me the best table in the place. And that was literally by asking her name and then asking her how she got her name and then listening. So my life is different. I would have just said like, "Oh, thank you very much. Please be on your way. We're not unhappy with any of our food."
Right. Wow. And how about in any of the businesses you've been involved in, or your clients, where you've seen, I guess, what these kind of tactical empathy techniques or negotiation skills have played into that and making a real difference in real life?
Well, so one of the things that, as an EOS implementer, we're a teacher, a coach, and a facilitator. And the facilitation piece is, I think, where the money is made. And so I've had multiple different types of facilitation coaches. And my feeling was that being a better negotiator in a session would help me become a better facilitator. And the issue is that negotiation is a depreciable skill, so you have to practice those skills. And so the example I gave at the restaurant is an example of low stakes practice. Higher stakes practice would be an example. I was in a room, everyone's checking in. They're all like only checking in on the positive things. And unfortunately, there were two private equity operating partners in the room, and the CFO didn't come to the quarterly meeting. And in that case, I used what we call an accusations audit. And I said, "You're not going to like what I have to say. You're going to think that I'm really being super critical. You may think I'm out of line. But the reality is you all checked in very positively. And by the way, the CFO is not here and he's not performing. And there's a reason why the private equity guys are here." And with that, the entire tenor of the day changed. I didn't have to say much. Everyone stood up at attention. The issues were addressed, and that changed the entire day, just using 30 seconds of tactical empathy to get the room clear on what was important. Within 30 seconds, the CEO had a text from the two private equity guys. "That's the reason that Jonathan's in the room." Right? I know they're not supposed to use their phones in the room. I can't stop it. So
for that particular text, you'll make an exception.
I would make an exception. So it's those kind of high stakes negotiations where, your life depends on it. Like the business life depends on being able to have whatever the right conversations are. I'm not responsible for exactly how the business is running, but I am responsible for helping them have the most productive, open, healthy conversations they can. So I use the skills for that purpose.
Right. Feels like you have all this artifice that's sort of built up, and you just sort of dropped just through observations of things that were obvious in a way. You just dropped a bomb into the room and just kind of broke all those artifices, and all that artificial positivity, of not talking about the real stuff that matters.
Yeah, and like in the 5 dysfunctions of a team, they talk about artificial harmony. So we had artificial harmony, and somehow, one of the things with a facilitator is a facilitator really does two things. They observe. So I observed what the situation was, and then they're an intervention. So I intervened, but I intervened using tactical empathy because I could have, I don't know, yelled and screamed at them and say, "You're not telling the truth. How dare you not, call out what's really going on?" And instead, I like set them up with accusations audit, and then just sort of dropped the bomb and said, these guys aren't here for their health. They're here for the business's health, and
Right.
they haven't been here before. So why don't we get into the meat of what's really going on?
Right. And I heard two parts to that. First, you set up their expectations to hear something bad, which I do remember from Never Split the Difference. And then that accusations audit. I didn't remember that term. Share if you can, like maybe like the one most useful or most commonly useful skill. I know, it's a large repertoire toolkit, I'm sure, of skills that, but what's one technique that you could like teach anybody who's watching or listening to this now from these negotiation techniques or tactical empathy techniques that people can use in their lives or in their businesses now?
So one of the simplest techniques that we've used, and so as an example, I use this at a fundraising dinner I went to that I didn't want to go to, but my wife wanted to go to. Like, we all go to these events where you're like, oh, it's a networking event and I don't really want to be here, but I'm here, so I might as well make the best of it. And so you end up talking to someone, and we just have a concept called a mirror. So you say 1 to 3 of the last three words of a sentence that someone said. And so we have a student who, she wasn't good at mirrors, and what she decided to do at a networking event was to walk around and only mirror people. And by the end of the time, she was the most interesting person in the room, because all she did was listen. We say stay curious and mirror people, and mirror. When I say the last 1 to 3 words, it's really like 1 to 3 words that are important that will get them to sort of continue on with their conversation. So that's a really simple technique.
Yeah.
If you went to a networking event, you could try.
That's a great example, and it is great in its simplicity. Could you give an example of like a statement and a mirror to that?
Statement?
Or a statement that someone makes and that you're listening to, and then
that was a mirror.
There you go. See, I didn't even you got me. Statement. Yeah, there you go. That's
a mirror.
That's the most concise example you could give.
Right, but then you started explaining to me what you meant by statement, and I use an upward inflection when I said it, and then all of a sudden you continued. And you would have continued if you didn't look at my face and go like, "Oh, you got me."
That's okay. Great example. It's about, I'm asking for like a story or example, and you do one word, and that is the story or example. I appreciate that. Oh, I guess, what are some times, I guess, when let's take this example of the mirroring, the last 1 to 3 important words to get someone to continue without having to, like, I don't know, ask long questions.
What did you mean by that? And then you're like, oh, I feel like at that point you feel interrogated, as opposed to me going, statement. Oh, he was clearly listening to me now, but he didn't understand that piece. So I'm going to now clarify it, because the urge to correct is irresistible for people. So
yeah, you just get the person to go on, and we'll get to learn more and more and more, which could be useful information.
And when we say learn, we call that the Black Swan. Things, people drop things that you wouldn't know otherwise. And a Black Swan is some piece of information that helps you continue to understand them better or improve your negotiation.
Drop those black swans. How did you, 2014, I think you said, how did you get connected? Oh, you mentioned this Abu Dhabi thing. How did he get connected with you? Like, what's the story of how you became a Black Swan certified trainer? Like, how did that whole thing happen?
So Chris describes this story. We're at the Tower Club, and there's this guy who kind of holds court at the Tower Club. And he's like, Chris, Jonathan, you two should talk. And then he walked away. And Chris like, Hell is that guy? So Sid connected us. I got to know Chris. He told me he had this issue in Abu Dhabi. I had operations in Abu Dhabi at the time. It's not a, it's a relatively small town if you're dealing in the security sector. I actively tried to help Chris, asking for nothing, just, help first, core value. He took me out on his boat in DC. So he had some folks in from Abu Dhabi. He took me out on his boat. We got to be friends. He kept asking me about EOS. He's like, I don't understand. What is it that you do? You keep helping me, but what do you do? We started EOS. We made a whole bunch of progress. We are in the process of writing a book that's like, what the heck is tactical empathy? Like, what the heck is EOS? But what the heck, like the missing manual for never split the difference. So we've been working on it for a while. We've had a couple of false starts with it. And in the process of writing that book, I've learned more and more and more about tactical empathy, or the Black Swan skills. And I'm just fascinated by it. So I find it, fascinating, and I've committed myself to learning the skills, and then it makes me better EOS implementer. It's definitely a distinct set of skills. To be in the room and have both expert EOS implementer skills and the ability to facilitate a conversation with Black Swan is, it's a winning combination.
Would you say is that the most, I don't know, useful of the facilitation skills that you've picked up over the years, or the trainings that you've gotten? Or is it a mix?
I think facilitation is a trade, right? And so like I needed to understand. So when I told you earlier that a facilitator is an it's a facilitation about observation and intervention, that came from Dr. Dino Signori. So we started with him. He's has a PhD in organizational development, and he gave me the academic view. So I think Mary Pat Knight too. She's my EQ coach, and so she gives me the EQ view. And then Chris gave me the tactical empathy view. Like, I don't think one is necessarily
sufficient by itself.
Just like layers of. And now I'm working with a tone coach, working on tone, like an acting coach, to work on tone. It needs my tone.
Was a thing.
Well, tone is part of tactical empathy, and I want to get better at it. So I have an acting coach to help me with tone. So
it's fascinating.
You grow or die.
Grow or die. Did you mention before? What did you call an accusation audit?
Accusations audit.
What is it? Accusations audit. What does that mean?
Accusations audit is I'm basically going to try to say what you're thinking, negative thoughts that you're thinking in your head before you say them to me. So if I
like accusations against yourself or against other people, could be anything.
That's a good question. I've never answered that question that way, but the accusations audit is like, I think you're thinking this, so I'm going to say this. You probably think I'm greedy. You probably think I'm going to try to, leave nothing on the table for you. Like all these things that if you're in a contentious negotiation, people would think about. So now
takes the wind out of the feeling when you are unashamed to just say it.
You just say it. You're acknowledging how they're feeling. So now they're like, wait, do you have a plug and you can see what's in my head? So you walk to, so the example would be when I did the example in the session, it was like, I wanted them to know that I might be out of line. Like, you might think I'm out of line because like, I wasn't really comfortable saying, hey, by the way, these guys from the private equity firm are here and no one mentioned that. And by the way,
you're being babysat right now because they don't trust you.
Yes, that's what I was basically saying. Right. And everyone was thinking it, but no one wanted to say it. But I wanted the private equity guys to know that I wasn't just going, look at these jerks coming into this room and messing up our meeting. Like that would not have worked. So I acknowledged that they were there, and I acknowledged why we probably thought they were there, and which then created a whole conversation around how everyone felt. But it neutralized the negative. So I think of it as like, if you know noise canceling, you're basically emotion canceling the negative with an accusations audit.
Wow.
That's me being like a physics guy, but engineer.
Well, I don't know physics, but I get the analogy. That's that's a great point. I mean, you take away the power of of that negativity. I mean, you do two things. I mean, one is you take, as you said, you cancel it out in a way. You take away the power of it by acknowledging it and making it open, and it's not this like this thing that we can't talk about and that we're sort of scared or angry about. But it also, as you said, opens up the conversation to talk about real things.
Yeah, and like the weird thing is when the first time you do it, you're like, but I might be giving away something. Like I might be giving away my advantage. Like they're already thinking it. So like, why not just put it out there?
Right.
It's like a different
You're
way
not
to think.
introducing anything new. You're not like, I never would have thought of that objection if you hadn't mentioned it just now out loud.
I can't believe this guy, disrespected me or whatever. You probably feel disrespected, whatever, if that's what they were feeling.
Right.
Like, that's right. I do feel disrespected, and they'll actually tell you.
Right.
And we're not afraid of having, like, that's what tactical empathy is about. We're not afraid to go deal with how people are feeling. We want to understand how they're feeling so we can come up with a deal that works.
Right. Well, definitely recommend everybody read it. I read it, really enjoyed it, and plan to reread it soon. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I know one thing I was really curious about was not everybody can afford to, or it makes sense to retain the Black Swan Group to consult on negotiation tactics and skills and training or consultation. But I know one thing I heard about is this FireSideChat or this Black Swan network that people can join. What exactly is that? What's its purpose? Who's it for?
So we call it the Black Swan Network, and it's powered by FireSideChat. So
Okay.
it's interesting. It's like the modern day fan club. So where you used to write in and they'd send you back like a
I had
t-shirt
a
or something for
I
being.
was a member at 10 years old. I was the member of the Michael Jackson fan club. And I don't know, or like 8 years old, I don't know, 1981 or 83 or something. I was Michael Jackson fan club member. But anyway,
So
yeah.
think of it as the modern day fan club. So we have this issue where we have this super premium product offering. We have coaching, we have in-person events, we have keynote speeches, but as you said, not everyone can afford that. And what we decided to do was partner with FireSideChat to create the Black Swan Network. So on a weekly, roughly a couple times a month basis, we will have our coaches available to present on a tactical empathy related topic. Once a month, roughly, Chris comes on. He was on with Mark Cuban last week. So it was awesome to see Chris with Mark. I got to be part of arranging that and meeting Mark. Mark's a really cool guy. He's a great entrepreneur and just really easy to get along with. Really, he is what he looked. What you see is what you get with Mark. So he was amazing. And the idea is like, how do we get more people involved with tactical empathy? And the cool thing about the platform is that you can actually come up on stage, like virtual stage, and ask a question of the coach or of Chris at that time while the event is going. So that's the idea. That's why we created it. It was an easier way to, instead of having to travel all over the place to meet all these folks, it was a more accessible and affordable way to share the knowledge.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's, with any set of intellectual property and knowledge based, business training skills, to have that option of, there's something between the book and the expensive services, right? So that people could still access much more than they can with the book, and access and be with other people who were also trying to learn and improve in the same things. So yeah, I love those kind of models.
Yeah, we're fortunate to be teamed with the team at Fireside and have some amazing coaches who can present the skills.
Yeah, that's awesome. Listen, Jonathan, I really appreciate you making the time for this conversation, teaching about mirroring and some of the other tactical empathy skills and accusations, audits, and and a very interesting background, and Mark Cuban and the stories and everything. Really appreciate. And thank you for coming out and sharing this.
Thanks, Ben. Keep up the great work. Proud to see
Thank you.
all that you've accomplished.
Thank you so much. And yes, and I'll hopefully see you again soon. And we'll see everybody else on the other side. Thanks.
You're listening to Win Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.